Okay, we have our third speaker, Mr. Ben Rojas. I hope I said your last name correctly. Ben actually is our ODOT geologist, so I really appreciate that title. The geology is certainly very important for civil engineering, particularly for highways. Ben actually came out of University of Arizona, and the same school that Professor Zaman received his PhD. A little bit unfortunately, I got my degree from Arizona State, so we have some Arizona connections here. He actually worked in Arizona for a few years, Green Valley, and then moved in Tulsa, worked there for a private company for a few years, and about 4 or 5 years ago, ODOT was fortunate enough to have Ben to join ODOT as ODOT geologist, and he's going to talk about something very exciting. The title is Oklahoma Rocks, so that's what it is. He's going to talk about our rocks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Wing. Okay, how you guys doing after lunch? Well, my presentation is going to cover the geology in Oklahoma, particularly the geology. It's not all of it, but select spots where currently we're getting aggregates from these places. So it's going to maybe jump around a little bit, but not so much. I'm going to start in the oldest geology and then work my way to the youngest geology. And that's not saying the youngest like the most recent, but just the youngest that's being currently mined. So in my slides, I'm going to talk about these 3 topics: the rock type, the ages, whether it's a marine type of a rock or a terrestrial type of a rock, and then the structure, if it's flat or if it's tilted. we have rocks. I'm sure people have driven down to Dallas and passed through the Arbuckles, and they're tilted. But maybe you live in the Tulsa area, and if you've ever driven through a road cut there, it's flat. So there's a difference there in structure. So this is the map of Oklahoma, a generalized geologic map of Oklahoma. And the circles are the spots that I'm going to talk about. So the oldest is being kind of in the south central, and it sort of works its way up to the north in terms of age. So this first place is the oldest rock we have here in Oklahoma. This is a granite quarry. And so there's a couple of types of granite there, and they're listed up there in the top left corner. But these are very old rocks, as old as 1.4 billion years old. So it's old geology that still works. We use it all the time in construction. As you can see, there's trucks that are loading up the rock right now, or not right now, but right then. That's just another face of the rock. And then here kind of showcases the rock at a close glimpse. You can see the difference in grain size. The one on the right is not currently mined. That unit doesn't show up at that quarry, but that's the Tishomingo granite. That's our oldest rock. And then in the middle, I believe that was the Troy granite. And then in the bottom right corner is the Birch granite diorite. So here's another picture of another granite quarry, and this is in the west part of Oklahoma, and it's younger than the one we were just at. Not by a whole lot, but geologically speaking, but it's younger nonetheless. And so that's a nice picture of the benches, as you will. Here is just another face, or looking at the face of the rock, and to pay close attention, you can see all the oxidation along the structure of the rock. So typically that's caused because of water and oxygen kind of going into the cracks. And so it produces that type of alteration. And then here's different rock types in that quarry. So you'll find these 3 different rock types in that quarry. One is, I believe, the one on the right and the one on the top of the left picture. Those 2 are the Long Mountain granite, and then the bottom is a hybrid. So it's not completely granite because it doesn't have an appreciable amount of quartz, but nonetheless, it's still igneous. And then see, here's another quarry. This one's a really cool one. This rock type is gabbro. So it's still intrusive, but it's a little different mix-wise of rocks we were just looking at before. A lot of people call this black granite, but it's not granite because it doesn't have an appreciable amount of quartz. And here's a close-up of the rock. And here's another close-up of cut pieces. And the thing to pay attention to is the grain size. So on the left hand, you get a lot more coarser grain, and on the right, a little finer grain. And that's what makes that place unique over there, is because you got a bit of a different sequencing in the igneous characteristics, not only mineralogy, but grain size as well. Here's coming back to the central part of Oklahoma. This is another igneous quarry. This is a little bit different though. This is igneous extrusive, where the ones we were looking at before were igneous intrusive. So the difference there is just the magma intrusive underneath the ground, and then this being extrusive, blowing out like a just typical volcano. And the material there is rhyolite, but it's intruded by diabase. And then so here you can see the rhyolite, the red on the bottom, and then the black basalt or diabase on the top. And then here is the rock types, kind of what they look like. So what's really interesting here, I wanted to include, the one on the left is a breccia. So it's a product of when the volcano blows, it takes everything with it and it makes a new rock type. And that's what you see right there. That unit is not necessarily showing up in maps, but it's been identified by other work from other grad students. So it's very unique. And then here, we're moving over to the east part of Oklahoma. Now we're going away from igneous into marine. So from terrestrial to marine sedimentary rock types. This one is made up of limestones and dolomites in different amounts, different proportions. But nonetheless, the feature here to pay attention to is just the tilt of the rock. So, yeah. Old rock, Cambrian to Ordovician, so that's in the order of 500 to 450 million years ago. And that's kind of what the rock types look like. And so, you can see the different colors in there, the tans and the dark grays. That's sort of what you see here in the walls. You can see the dark gray. The tan sometimes in the gray can be a little changing just because of the alteration. If the wall's been sitting there for quite a long time, then it's going to oxidize a little bit. The colors are going to change. So in geology, it's always careful when you're looking at a rock and you see the color, and you got to be careful to jump to a conclusion to what it is, because color can be a product of oxidation alteration. So here we're moving west from the previous place, but again, the thing to pay attention to is the tilt. So as you can sort of start to see, the tilt of the rocks is sort of in the southern part of Oklahoma, at least the more pronounced tilt to the rocks. And I'll get to that in a minute. But here you can see the bedding is pretty flat, but it tilts to, you could say, to the left of the picture. And in reality, the tilt is to the west in a regional sense. And this rock is also old, Cambrian and late Ordovician. And so now I want to say, before I keep going, I want to highlight a lot of the geologic survey work. Most of my knowledge that I've gained here has come from reading their papers, their circulars, their bulletins, looking at their maps, even talking with some of the folks down there. They're very, very knowledgeable, and that's where I derive a lot of my information. So, of course, a lot of these pictures I took of myself when I go to places, but most of the information that I convey to you comes from reading their literature and all their research. Here's a rock type that I found, and I believe this is the Bally dolomite, so it's somewhere in that wall, but this is what it looks like up close. So this is a crystalline dolomite, and you can sort of see pockets of crystals that are grown. So it's a very, very cool rock. We use it in construction, but from an aesthetic standpoint, from a mineralogy standpoint, it's pretty neat. Here's another one, and this is not from that quarry. This is from a different quarry, but nonetheless, it's still dolomite, and you can see just how cool it looks from a crystal standpoint, from what we call vugs, so there are little holes in the rock where crystals grow. As you can tell, I'm a fan of minerals. And then, so now I'm taking you from the central part, kind of more south. Again, the main thing to see is how tilted one side of the picture is versus the other side, where what has happened is kind of like if you were to push a rug. If you're pushing a rug from one side, it's going to start contorting and twisting and bending. Further down in the rug, nothing's going to happen. So you could use that rug pushing analog as to what has happened in Oklahoma. From the south to the north, there's been push, and everything in the immediate vicinity of that push has tilted, which is what you would see in the Arbuckles and stuff like that. And then as you go further north, the things kind of flatten out a little bit. There's still some kinks and buckles and stuff like that, and that's typical, but from a general standpoint, most of the pronounced tilt is in the south part of Oklahoma. We're getting a little bit younger in these rocks. These were the rocks, when the first oceans came to Oklahoma, these are the products. This is what you're seeing right here in terms of the first marine environments in Oklahoma. And a lot of these rocks host a lot of fossils, particularly one called the trilobite. And then there's a plethora more of different kind of fossils, but a lot of these limestones that we have in Oklahoma from the time of ancient oceans and all of that are either chock full of fossils, have a certain kind of amount of fossils, or just don't even have any at all. Here's another cool picture I thought. Pay attention to the right part of the picture. You can see how these beds contorted and completely overturned. And that's a very typical case in the Arbuckles. It just goes to show how much force these rock types underwent in pushing them and breaking them and then twisting them. There's parts in Oklahoma over there by Turner Falls where they're completely overturned and they're upside down. Now, you may not see that from the I-35, unless of course you stopped and took a look and really just kind of looked at them. You could see kind of they're upside down almost. So it's a very dynamic place down there in the Arbuckles, and quite honestly, it's world renowned from a geologic and structure standpoint. Of course, not to mention from an oil and gas standpoint too. Here's a picture, and the reason I took it, or the reason I want to show it, is you can see in the background there's a huge vein of orange. Now, what that is there's a lot of pyrite in some of these units, and that pyrite, when it gets water, it tends to oxidize, and that's the iron oxidizing. So sometimes you might see the face and see, oh man, this is orange, but if you actually get in there, break the rock up, you'll see it's fresh limestone, but it's just been colored by the vein that has been being oxidized through time and time and time. So I see this often in quarries, the pyrite there, and certainly we wouldn't want pyrite in our construction aggregates because it could be deleterious. I don't know how much pyrite is enough to be deleterious, but I know that it's there. So it's just something that's interesting. Here, we're moving north. Just a little bit, not much. We're still in the same Arbuckle system. Again, here you can see the tilt of the beds are a heck of a lot more pronounced. These beds were flat at one point. So like I was telling you before, I want to talk about the tectonic event. So sometime around 300 million years ago, there was a big mountain building event that produced the mountains in the southeast, produced the mountains in the middle, all the way out to the Lawton area. And you can see tilt in all those rocks from the west to the east clearly. And so, but I feel like in this part of the world, in the middle part, down by the Davis area, they are tilted and they are nearly vertical. So it's very interesting from a, again, structure standpoint to sort of be able to see this firsthand, read about it, maybe try and make sense of it. So it's interesting. And the age here, we're starting to slowly get a little bit younger. Late to middle Ordovician is somewhere 440 million years. So slowly we're getting younger. Here's another picture. I thought this was pretty neat because it really highlights number one, the separation of beds, the different lithology of the bed, but then just the tilt. Geologists often, when they see tilt in rocks, they get excited because they know something something big happened there to produce that tilt. And, taking it even further, when you're talking about geotech, you sometimes do want to know what the tilt of the beds, because that could affect your construction or your design. So it's always key to understand where you're building, what you're building on, and what you're using to build. There's a picture of kind of what the rock looks like. Now, typically the rocks from the Arbuckle Mountains are dark gray, light gray, sometimes a little bit white. So there's a mix of that. Here's a picture next door to where we just were, but we're in different geology. A little bit different, not hugely different, but nonetheless different. And we're getting younger again. But here to pay attention is just the thinness of the beds. I haven't seen in my experience here if that makes a difference in the aggregate, because in the end it gets crushed. But at least here from an depositional environment standpoint, maybe it was very episodic, very quick, the deposition. But again, you can see how the structure has sort of tilted and twisted and crunched up like an accordion, these beds. And sometimes that sort of tells you about the mineralogy of the beds, because they'll behave a little different depending on the rock type, depending on the forces. Here's what the rock looks like there. Now we're getting into the north part where it gets flat. So, I wouldn't say featureless, but I would just say it's different tectonic environment. Here, we're getting kind of in the northeast part of Oklahoma, and we're definitely getting younger. And the sequences here, you can have limestone and shale or limestone and sandstone. They kind of interbed. So it tells you about the environment there and how quickly it changed. Here's another picture of the same area. Now this is next door, but it's even younger. So the place where we're at, this place is another similar geology, but still young, getting younger. But nonetheless, the flatness of it. So as I move a little bit further north, there's really no more structure, if you will. And this is getting into the Pennsylvanian. So we're talking anywhere from 300 to 325 million years. And that's what the rock looks like there. And so here, it's flat. Now we're in the northeast part of Oklahoma, probably in the Tulsa area. Middle Pennsylvanian rocks, so you got your limestones that are a little lighter, a little darker. But these are chock full of fossils, all kinds of different fossils. And that's just another view of it. That's what the rock looks like. And then finally here, we're finishing up with the sandstone. So I've showed you intrusives, extrusives, granites, rhyolites, everything that intruded those units. I've shown you limestones of different ages and different kind of types, because I've also included dolomites in there. And now this is a sandstone, kind of in the east central part, probably by Eufaula. But the main thing here to note, you got the flatness of the beds, but then you got this kind of a tilt in between the beds, and that right there indicates flow. Okay, so being a sandstone, sandstones are typically created from rivers that are flowing. So right now our Arkansas River, the Cimarron River, those rivers are sooner or later going to make sandstones. Well, they're making them right now, but sooner or later they'll get harder. And so, from a structure standpoint, you start to look at these kind of things and develop a framework, or what happened back then. And so here, real quick, structure in Oklahoma. On the bottom left-hand corner, there's these lines that go across Oklahoma. Well, the pictures, these cross-sections are basically slices through Oklahoma. And so you can sort of see the ones kind of the one on the top is flat because that goes from the panhandle all the way to the northeast. There's nothing there, it's just flat. But the rest of them, you can see there's a lot of tilt, there's a lot of breaks. The units are kind of crunched and twisted and conformed. So I just wanted to highlight how I know a lot of people sometimes they come into Oklahoma and they think it's flat. Well, that's just because it's been eroded for millions of years. There really is a lot of structure below the surface. And so I wanted to highlight that with this. And just a quick note, the person who wrote this, Ken Johnson, very famous geologist, I derive a ton of information from him, so I want to give him kudos. And real quick, this is just kind of neat. It tells about, well, when did the oceans come in, when did the rocks form, when did the oceans leave, that kind of thing. So I thought I'd throw that in there just from a informational standpoint. And then this is, again, these are the circles where I covered, talking about different rock types, but this is a geologic map that you would typically see. So all the colors indicate units, rock type units, formations, groups, and then all the lines in between those, well, those kind of define, well, this is one unit, this is the next one, and so on and so forth. You also have a lot of faults and structure that are shown on this. Kind of on the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the lines real tight. That means something pushed them. Sort of where it's flat, it kind of ceased, but it started up again by the Mill Creek area over there. Again, this is the westernmost part of the Arbuckles, and I didn't show any areas here, but I still wanted to show this because you can see, you know, the tilt again manifests itself way out there and all the way as far east as Coleman. So it's a big system. By the way, this is the Lawton area at kind of the bottom part of the corner or the circle. Here, I talked about the two places that are circled there. This is westernmost Oklahoma. This is probably the extremes of our igneous rock, all the way out there by the Altus area, the Snyder area. And again, one thing to note, you can see the colors, and I'll show you this in a couple maps coming up. But when you have a unit colored completely, that means it's flat. The structure's no longer there. Right, here we're back to structure. So this is the Arbuckle Mountains, and it's kind of hard to see, but the I-35 is one big bold red line coming through. Very cool area. And this is the Tulsa area, so you can see basically one color covers the area. That tells you it's flat. That tells you it's flat, but the shaded areas are active mining locations. And then this is my last map. This is the southeast part of Oklahoma. Everybody knows there's a lot of mountains and relief. And so what this map shows is just that, how twisted the rocks are, how close together they are. And so it's very unique for me because when I came to Oklahoma, I thought, well, you know, I thought it was flat, but it's not. And I found out it's very, very dynamic. You have all the rock types here in the geologic record. You even have dinosaur tracks in the panhandle. So from a geologic standpoint, Oklahoma is very rich. And this is the references I cited. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to email me.
One question.
All right. It's construction related. So if you have test results from Mohs hardness, unconfined compression, point load test classification, and also surcharge test for abrasiveness, would you be able to tell whether it's a rippable or blasting?
Are you asking to differentiate between rippability?
Correct.
And that? Well,
Yep.
did you mention seismic?
No, surcharge abrasive.
Okay, I don't know if I'm familiar with that. Well, obviously, all those parts of data are useful for that. But, you know, because I've had a bit of experience with rippability, seismicity, or seismic analysis, it's always good to have boots on the ground to see what you got. Okay, if you do your drilling and you're pulling up the core and you see the bedding is very thick, well, you want to note that. Bedding, like I was showing you before in the pictures, the way the beds are laying, how thick they are, all of that has a play into whether it's going to be rippable or not. So, you know, you got to use as much data as you can to really make a sound judgment when it's time to do that, because that certainly involves a lot of money, whether you're going to blast or not.
try to see which way to go.
It's a tough call. I mean, it's a tough call because you can't see everything that's below the surface. You just have your hole that you drilled and you're looking at it. Oh, okay. Well, then that helps because you can actually look at what you're fixing to blast or rip out. I think it's very important to have a component of mapping in that.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I appreciate it.